Hi, my name is Evan Watts. I'm a wildlife photographer based in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and today I'm going to be giving you guys 5 tips to improve your wildlife photography. So I got into wildlife photography mainly just due to an interest in wildlife to begin with. I was getting a degree in wildlife biology, but started messing around with cameras at that time and really enjoyed taking photos. So I paired that with my passion for wildlife, started visiting Yellowstone, and then eventually coming out here and working out here in the summers in between semesters in college while I was in college. And that eventually snowballed into being full-time out here in Yellowstone. My kind of lifelong interest in wildlife and ecosystems and how ecosystems function is what draws me to wildlife photography most. So my first tip is going to be to use a wide aperture when photographing wildlife. Particularly when you're shooting up-close wildlife portraits. This is really important. What a wide aperture is going to do for you is create a shallower depth of field if you're using a lens like a 600 f4, 400 2.8. Even some of these zoom lenses like a 400 that shoots at f5.6 can work great for this. And that shallow depth of field is going to isolate your subject more. It's going to create some blur in the background and in your foreground, which creates a much more artistic feel and eliminates some of those distractions in the background and really brings the focus into the animal. A wide aperture is also really useful in low light scenarios, which we often shoot in with wildlife because wildlife tend to be active very early in the morning or late in the evening. So having a wide aperture can be really helpful both artistically for your photos and technically when you're shooting in those really low light situations and you need to gather as much light as possible. So my second tip is when you're composing wildlife images, you always want to leave space in the direction that the animal is looking in. The reason for that is because it creates a better visual flow for the viewer of the image as they're looking at the wildlife. It implies movement if you have an animal that's moving in a certain direction and looking in that direction. Leaving more space, negative space in the direction the animal is going implies that the animal is moving through the frame. Or if you have a stationary animal that's looking in a certain direction, it implies that maybe it's looking at something out of frame. In addition to that, it helps not crowd your subject. You don't want a frame that is super tight on the animal, so tight that it feels like it has no space to breathe. You want to leave a little bit of space around the animal, and especially in the direction that the animal is looking, you're allowing that animal some space to breathe and some space to move in your photo. My third tip is to shoot in a continuous shooting mode. This is really important when you're shooting action scenes, wildlife moving quickly. Maybe you have a red fox out here in Yellowstone that is jumping through the air and diving down into the snow to try to catch a rodent. When we have these cameras like the Canon R5, which I shoot on, that can shoot up to 20 frames a second continuously, we can capture every single pose as an animal is moving through a scene and make sure that we get that perfect moment that looks the best for our image. My next tip is one that is very simple, but a lot of people struggle with, and that is don't be afraid to raise your ISO when necessary to get the proper exposure. All too often I see photographers that are lowering their shutter speed so that they don't have to raise their ISO to get the proper exposure. And when this happens, especially if you have a moving animal and you're shooting on a long lens, you're going to start to get some motion blur in the animal, and the animal itself is not going to be sharp. And as much as none of us want to introduce grain to our photos, if you have to get the proper exposure, it's better to have a grainy wildlife photo than a blurry wildlife photo. So my fifth and final tip is one that is more wildlife related than photography related, and that is to know your subject. If you don't know your subject, if you don't have an idea of what they're eating and where they're looking for that food, what kind of habitats they're using and where you might find them, then you're not going to be very successful as a wildlife photographer because you don't know how to find the animals that you want to photograph. So knowing your subject's behavior and knowing the kind of environments that they use is really important to finding them. So those are my 5 tips for wildlife photography. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you found those helpful. If you want to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, those will all be linked down below here. And comment below and let us know which Yellowstone animal you want to photograph most.